Welcome to this panel on the geopolitics of vaccines. So vaccine diplomacy is obviously a very pertinent topic that we will surely discuss in this panel from CALD, the Council of Asian Liberals and Democrats, which will look at the implications of vaccine diplomacy for democratic renewal in Asia. So with that said, and without further ado, let me turn the floor over to our excellent speakers and our moderator, Marites Vitug, editor-at-large from Rappler, Philippines. Marites, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And hi, good afternoon to everyone. I hope you're not too sleepy because of your heavy lunch. But I'd like to welcome you all to the panel, The Geopolitics of Vaccines, Implications for Democratic Renewal in Asia. And as already mentioned, this is organized by the Council of Asian Liberals and Democrats, or CALD. And again, I'm Marites Vitug, a journalist from the Philippines, and I will be moderating this discussion. Let me introduce our three speakers in the order of their presentations. We are very pleased and very glad to have with us this afternoon, Abhisit Vejjajiva, the former Prime Minister of Thailand and former Chairperson of CALD. Next is Florencio, or Butch as he is popularly called, is former Budget Secretary of the Philippines and also another former Chairperson of CALD. And last but not the least is Peifen Hsieh, Deputy Director of the Department of International Affairs of the Democrat Progressive Party of Taiwan. Thank you all for joining us. Kun Abhisit, you have the floor.
Thank you, Marites. I know that the last 3 days, this conference has been engaged in a number of discussions, obviously centering around the impact of COVID-19 and various governments' responses to the pandemic. And of course, issues related to democratic development or the state of democracy in the various countries have been widely discussed, whether it's about governments using the opportunity of the pandemic to extend their own powers, often therefore violating people's rights, whether it's the issue of media freedom, whether it's the issue of the various conflicts that have arisen since the pandemic. Vaccine diplomacy is also another factor that has been important and has had an impact on democratic renewal or democratic development in the region. And I think the current panel's focus will be on this very issue. What I'd like to do in my remarks would be to make what I feel are two important points, general points, before I move specifically to the experience we've had in Thailand related to this issue, and then suggesting what would need to be done to allow democratic renewal to continue to take place, if that is what our objective is. The first point that I would like to make is that we have to recognize that even before the pandemic, liberal democracy has already been in recession in most countries, and also in this region, with maybe some exceptional cases. But it's also a global phenomenon. And the recession of liberal democracy has been driven by a number of factors: people's disillusionment with the free market system, if you like, the neoliberal thinking on economics. And that is very much shown up by the issue of inequalities that have dominated much of the political dialogue everywhere. And these had already set the scene for a number of leaders who are authoritarian, extremists, populist, nationalists, and so on. So it's important to recognize that this was already a trend, if you like, even before the pandemic. And a related point to this is that along with this recession of liberal democracy in various countries has also witnessed the decline in multilateralism. And for me, I think democratic development, particularly if you look at the global picture, needs to go hand in hand with a strengthened multilateral system. And what the pandemic has done clearly is that it has emphasized the failure of multilateral institutions and arrangements to make an appropriate response at the global or international level. And this obviously poses an important problem for many countries in the region. Before the pandemic, of course, we were all concerned about the trade war between China and the States that had obviously raised tension almost everywhere, and also affected a lot of the economies and countries around in the region. But again, with the COVID pandemic, what we've seen right from the start is the inability of an international or a coordinated response to it. Even today, the issue of the origin of the pandemic is now being almost politicized as well, with China and the States again being in conflict about the possible theories, if you like, of how the pandemic originated. But worse than that, of course, was that when the world was hit by this pandemic and the WHO declared this a global pandemic, there was hardly any kind of global response. We never had a coordinated attempt on issues such as travel restrictions or lockdowns or whatever. Just imagine if this were all coordinated in an ideal world at the global level. I'm sure that the death tolls, the damages that we have seen over the last year and a half could be substantially reduced. So rather what we saw was individual countries taking their own separate measures, never coordinated. And you will notice that the epicenter of the pandemic moved from one region to another. Started in Asia, moved to Europe, moved to the States, and then it comes back. And unless we have a more coordinated strategy, this will continue to happen, especially with the mutations and new variants emerging as well. And so it goes with vaccines as well. While everybody seems to recognize the fact that no country is safe unless everybody's made safe. But again, there was never any attempt to distribute the vaccines in a way that would have the strongest or the most efficient impact on reducing the pandemic around the world. What we saw, of course, was a number of countries hoarding vaccines for their own national population. So what happens now is, well, in countries around the region, we are caught up in what the topic of this panel calls vaccine diplomacy. Now, China obviously had a head start. She had obviously experienced the pandemic first, but also seems to have been able to bring things under control fairly swiftly, and then moved on to use the old technology, if you like, for vaccines, which are inactivated vaccines, and therefore had that ready quite quickly, and was also in the position to actually distribute it around the world. On the other hand, the West, if you like, while they were involved in the research and the process of approval and so on, had to wait. And because it was not like in China, where everything can be centralized, the distribution was pretty much left to the market until, of course, the COVAX initiative came about, which I think for many, it's safe to say, was really too little and too late. And so again, what happens is the problem of the failure of multilateralism is highlighted by the pandemic, and it places a lot of strain and tension. And now various countries around the world get caught up in what you call vaccine diplomacy. Some people say, well, when there's a tension between the superpowers, can't we benefit from the fact that they would need to compete to maybe please us? But because the relationship or the tension has gotten so bad, it's more of a case where countries are often being forced to choose sides, which makes it even more difficult to handle. And in the case of Thailand, if I have time, I'll go on. When the issue of the vaccine becomes quite a big political issue, you can clearly see how the competition between the superpowers also affect the dialogue in the country and how we deal with the problem. That's the first main point. The second one is, when we talk about the competition between the two superpowers, if you like, we're not really comparing likes and likes. What I mean is this: China, in her diplomacy or in her foreign policy, has always emphasized the issue of mutual benefits, the ends, to justify the relations. And therefore, and she was not interested in interfering with internal politics, internal situation. That is the official stance. So for me, the vaccine issue is quite an easy game, if you like, to play from the Chinese side. All they need to do was to deliver to countries and hope that those countries that benefit from their actions will then strengthen the relations with China. It's very simple. The West, on the other hand, has always tried to base its relations with other countries supposedly on some kind of shared values. Unfortunately, I think 4 years of Trump in particular, but also poor leadership also around many Western countries, means that the West lost much of the legitimacy in trying to claim that values are the basis of much of the relations with many countries, including those in the region. So, for instance, when the EU takes protectionist measures, supposedly because of human rights abuse or environmental degradation, there's a feeling around the world in many countries that this was more about getting a trade advantage rather than seriously believing in values. And that, as I said, was very much undermined when you had leaders like Trump, often openly rejecting the values that the US supposedly stands for and says to its allies that this is what we should stand for. And so for the West, it was already a difficult situation. And as I said, because they were all concerned with their own populations, and COVAX was too little too late, I think right from the start, as far as vaccine diplomacy is concerned, China and Russia also, to a certain extent, very much got a head start. And that's very much the situation in Thailand, where what happened was we, like many places in the region, were quite successful last year in dealing with the pandemic. Unfortunately, that led to a false sense of security, and I think meant that there was no sense of urgency in acquiring vaccines for a number of governments in the region. And then the second wave or the third wave hit us. And pretty much Thailand was caught unprepared. Thailand had hoped that in its ability to produce AstraZeneca vaccines, which came online, the production was started in June, that would be the main vaccines that we use in our strategic fight against the pandemic. But when we were hit with the second and third wave in February, in April, we still did not have these vaccines. And that's where China stepped in and provided us with what we call the emergency vaccines. And indeed, almost a majority of vaccines that Thai people have had is Chinese. I think AstraZeneca is now about to overtake, or is just overtaken in numbers after 2-3 months of domestic production. And the situation in Thailand was also curious in the sense that the government made a very peculiar decision not to join COVAX. And so we were very much reliant on China's donations and sales of vaccines. And it's only later that we had donations from Western countries. The US and UK donated some vaccines, but again, they came rather late compared to the role Chinese vaccines have played here. Now, that would almost, if you like, be game over, except that the Delta variant came along. And what the Delta variant did, of course, was raise questions about the efficacy of the Chinese vaccines. And now the conventional wisdom here is that while the Chinese vaccines could give you immunity, it would give you full immunity for only a few months. And it was not so good at dealing with the Delta variant as against other variants. And so here, people begin to call for particularly mRNA vaccines to help fill the gaps that are being left by the Chinese vaccines and also by AstraZeneca. And so it still leaves room for the West to make their moves, as it were, to as far as vaccine diplomacy is concerned. And so looking ahead, what I see is the next part of this war would be what I would call a booster war, because everybody will be looking for their third or fourth shots. And so far, people have been expecting that they would use mRNA vaccines for that here in Thailand. But I believe that China will be distributing her own mRNA vaccines very soon, because she's already using that domestically. So that's really the situation. So let me just conclude, because I think my time is up, that the vaccine diplomacy or competition, if you like, again, clearly continues the problems that we have seen even before the pandemic, where I think what I call the weakness or failure of multilateralism gives so much role to the superpowers, and then place many of the countries in the region in a situation where they either are forced to choose or have to balance the relations between the superpowers. Secondly, while I criticize the global cooperation or coordination, if you like, I was also disappointed by the lack of a coordinated ASEAN response or ASEAN management of issues, including the issue of vaccine management. And indeed, we could even reach out to the dialogue partners and other key allies of ASEAN in East Asia and also in other regions of the world. But in the end, for me, to get out of this situation and to also promote what we hope to see, which is democracy renewal, I don't think ASEAN countries can sidestep this issue of integration based on common values anymore. Part of the reason why ASEAN hasn't been able to get together, I think, is because we have not really come up with a sense of common values and destination. I'm not saying that the values that we adopt need to be the same as other regions of the world, but we need something, some commonality that would bind the ASEAN countries together. That would enable us to uphold some simple principles, those particularly related to democracy within the region better. It would help us to increase our bargaining power against the superpowers. And it would then allow us to avoid being caught in this situation of competition or diplomacy, whatever you want to call it. And the pandemic is just hammering home all the trends and all the problems that we were facing before as far as democratic development is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kun Abhisit. May I turn over the floor to Secretary Butch Abad. Butch, you have to unmute yourself. Okay.
Am I okay?
Yes, yes, you're fine.
Okay. Good afternoon, guys. You know, when I saw that phrase in the title of our session, democratic renewal, I was a bit concerned because, you know, discussing renewal in a period of crisis can either be, you know, a problem or an opportunity. But being aware of the current state of democracy in the world today, I am feel my sense I'm a bit more concerned because as the slide, can I show the slide, please? The slide will show the painful truth today in the world is that autocracy is ascendant and democracy is in a state of decline. The second slide, please. I say that because in Freedom House, in an assessment published just in 2020, observed that the number of free countries reached its lowest level since the beginning of a 50-year period of global democratic decline, which Kun Abhisit earlier referred to. And in the same year, the number of not free countries reached its highest level. Now, democracy watchdog Larry Diamond observed that first, there really has been a significant and, in fact, accelerating rate of democratic breakdown in the world today. He also observed that the quality or stability of democracy has been declining in a number of large and strategically important emerging market economies. Third, he says authorization has been deepening, including in big and in strategically important countries. And finally, he said, the established democracies, beginning, of course, with, as we have been observing, the US, increasingly seem to be performing poorly and lack the will and self-confidence to promote democracy effectively abroad. So I think it's important to highlight that context because the arrival of the COVID-19 virus and the economic the dire economic consequences that it led to further puts some further concern on the present state of democracy in the world today. Can you have the next slide, please? Because of the pandemic, you know, countries across the globe adopted very strict mobility measures and closed economic, cultural, and social activities. In fact, Brookings Institution observed that COVID-19 recession is the most unequal in modern history because the pandemic not only made worse the deprivation and vulnerabilities of those left behind because of the problem of inequality, but also its fallout is pushing or making inequality even worse. And as we know, if nothing is done, given the present state of democratic recession, that the situation can still further disintegrate to what many democracy watchers call democratic depression. So that's the bigger risk if especially the democratic countries of the world do not come together and do something to address the many vulnerable low and medium income countries. I think the study of Freedom House identifies about 192 of them. That if nothing happens, then the situation further aggravates. Now, of course, everybody, we were all surprised that as the virus spread and created this global crisis, immediately after, unprecedented, can I have the next slide, please? Unprecedented investments in an unprecedented scientific race produce in record time, not just one vaccine, but various vaccines, and produce insufficient numbers. And I think what this has done is made people realize that the availability of vaccines has made people think that there is a possibility of developing a strategy for addressing the global crisis centered on a global public health strategy with the vaccine as the decisive weapon at the heart of it. And also realizing the nature of this vaccine, that even if countries who are able to develop, manufacture, and distribute within their territories vaccines or various types of vaccines, it is not possible to be secure in a country until all other countries have also been vaccinated because of the nature of the COVID-19 virus itself. And of course, if we think about doing that, to immunize the population of the entire world with 2 doses, we're really thinking about manufacturing and distributing 15 billion doses of vaccines. This is the estimate of the Serum Institute of India, which said that to develop, manufacture, and distribute that, it would be impossible to attain in less than 4 years. So this is the challenge. Well, this slide, this is the challenge that's confronting the world today. The slide here shows the variation in vaccination rates across the globe and if you look at it, it's just simply staggering because, of course, the rich, high-income democracies of the world are very much provided for. But as you go down the line, the poorer countries are getting very little share of the vaccines. So can I have the next slide, please? So I think earlier, Kun Abhisit mentioned the failure of multilateralism in response to the present pandemic crisis. I think this is really an important response that the democratic community has to make if it is to avoid shrinking further in this problem of democratic recession. We do need a new model of multilateralism as an international platform to restore global security using a global public health strategy with the vaccine as the decisive weapon. Achieving that also enables us also to address the possible dire consequences of already hard-pressed and suffering people in vulnerable and fragile democracies. You know, if this is available, then it can come to the aid of these many countries and prevent a further erosion of their commitment to democracy. There is a new form of multilateralism that has emerged. And I agree with Kun Abhisit when he said that it came a little late. But I think, nonetheless, I feel that it's important that it has come to fore because it serves as a prototype of this new form of multilateralism that we need to establish if we are to be able to contain this problem of the pandemic as soon as possible. And I refer to the UN backed COVAX. This is an initiative that is supported by the Vaccine Alliance, the organization, and another organization that is promoting innovations in vaccine development. I think the organization of COVAX, which is principally directed at ensuring equality in the distribution of vaccines across the globe, but especially paying attention to vulnerable low-income and medium-income countries. I think this is very important, especially for high income democracies, because this is a way of addressing this problem. And while it has started slowly and its coverage yet has not reached a level by which significant impact can be made, I think the fact that it's already there and the fact that it can in fact be an effective vehicle to address the possible impact of this crisis on the further erosion of democracy across the globe. I think it's important for us then to provide all the support that it needs, because as of now, there is no other vehicle that is available performing the function of COVAX. So a number of countries, especially the high-income democratic countries, have come forward, especially those group of people in the blue collar who are already filled with, who have already satisfied the requirements. In fact, if you look at this new chart, it shows you high-income countries insofar as how they've been able to develop their own reserve of vaccines, much against what they actually need and the excess that they have. I think this particular vaccines gives the rationale for why a COVAX is important to be organized, to be able to address the needs of other countries who are not as endowed as these high-income countries insofar as providing their own vaccines. So I think in terms of that strategy of being able to deal with the global crisis occasioned by the pandemic through a global public health strategy, using the vaccine as a principal weapon, I think we are then set, and therefore all it needs is really to rally the world to support such an initiative. In fact, learning from what so far has been happening with respect to COVAX and the support that it has received from many high-income countries in the world. There was recently a further study on this using the COVAX experience, which proposes to end the COVID-19 pandemic by next year. And this is the work of a study of two persons, Rukim Agarwal and Jita Gopinath of the IMF. And what they're proposing is that it is possible to vaccinate at least 40% of all countries by the end of 2021, and at least 60% by the end of 2022, and at the same time enabling widespread testing and tracing. But what it will require is for high-income countries or democracies to pull together 15 billion to fund the cost of the exercise. They see that if you look at this number, it seems very high. And yet, and they did a study of this, if you look at the cumulative economic benefit to be derived from proceeding with this project, which I suppose will come from, economies not having to be affected by too many closures or lockdowns, mobility not having to be sacrificed because of people wanting to be safe, and which therefore affects trade and tourism, economic, social and cultural activities not having to be either stopped or very limited because of the fear of spreading the virus. If many economic, social, and cultural activities are allowed to happen, I think in their estimate, the total economic benefits to be derived would come to as much as 9 trillion pesos. 9 trillion against 50 billion, they say, is about 180 to 1 ratio, which is a very generous return on investment. I mentioned this because, I think we because of the nature of the pandemic and the necessity of coming together to develop a global public health strategy, keeping in mind that the ability of one country to protect itself will amount to nothing, because we all realize that unless everybody is safe and vaccinated across the globe, then no one is really safe. Then proposals like this, I think, are important for us to seriously consider and find a way by which we can come together and to support them. Because as it is turning out, while it is true that the pandemic crisis is bringing forth a lot of other crises and problems to many countries in the world, it is also an opportunity to bring people together to assist the many other countries that are seriously affected by this problem. It's an opportunity also to once again rethink the importance and the necessity of countries coming together in a multilateral setting, so that working together, we can demonstrate to the world, especially with the high-income democracies working together with low-income and middle-income democracies, that the democratic system itself, even in a period of very difficult crisis, can be caring, can be capable, and can be effective in addressing the problems, especially those who need it most. And I think if we can do that, democracies in this world, then the idea of democratic renewal, the thought of being able to move in that direction, despite the fact that the present state of democracy is in recession, I think it becomes a possibility. And that is why this pandemic, I believe, can be an opportunity itself to make feasible, this discussion about democratic renewal, even if we find ourselves in a situation where autocratic regimes are ascendant and democratic regimes are in recession, even if we have to confront a public health crisis that has created huge problems across the globe, the opportunity is still there. And so I think that's the main point I'd like to stress. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Butch, for the big picture. And I think from the first two presentations, one thread that runs through both Abhisit's and Butch's presentation is multilateralism, and then two views on this issue, which we can talk about later. May I now call on Peifen to give her perspective on vaccine diplomacy, the geopolitics of vaccine diplomacy. You have the floor, Peifen.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. I would like to start by thanking CALD and Asia Center for inviting me to be part of this very, very distinguished panel. I'm truly honored. Today, we live in a world where the pandemic is yet to be countered and vaccines are still in shortage. And yet, politics continue to play a key role in the procurement and the distribution of the vaccines. So it is of paramount importance that we face and examine the geopolitics of vaccines and their implications. To this end, Taiwan presents a very unique case in the geopolitics of vaccines. In my presentation to follow, I will mainly focus on Taiwan's case. One is a very different situation from our neighbors, as what we just heard from the situation in Thailand and the Philippines and the bigger pictures. And I think because Taiwan is often unfortunately left out from many of the multilateralism mechanisms we just heard from previous speaker. So honestly, I don't know if or how Taiwan's experiences and geo implications therefrom and on democracies. So I guess I'll present the story to you and maybe leave the greater implications for democracy for later discussion. So as many of you may have known, the people of Taiwan have been living in kind of a parallel world from last June to this May, during which the country recording more than 250 consecutive days without any domestic cases. However, maybe because partly because of this, and we have been very slow, being slower than many other countries in rolling out our vaccination program. Since the new wave of outbreak of pandemic this May, we have been fighting two kinds of viruses. One is the coronavirus, and the other one is a political virus. So international media have reported very often that how Taiwan has been persistently targeted for political and COVID-19 related misinformation attacks. The new wave of pandemic outbreak, coupled with the vaccine shortages, provided yet another perfect foundation for these attacks, both from outside by China and from within by pro-China media and pro-China politicians. This attacks focuses mainly on portraying the Taiwanese government's pandemic control measures and vaccine procurement as incompetent, while also suggesting grossly exaggerated numbers of cases and deaths. Well, I will mainly focus on the vaccine procurement part today. The unique barrier Taiwan faces in vaccine procurement that no other countries experiences is the China factor. Since last year, Taiwanese government has been in talks with vaccine companies. By the end of last year, the government has procured approximately 20 million doses, including from the COVAX 4.76 million doses and 10 million doses from AstraZeneca, and intended to procure 5 million doses from Moderna and another 5 million doses from Pfizer BNT. The Moderna deal came still eventually, but the BNT deal didn't, well, until very recently. So last year, we were on the verge of signing a contract with for the purchase of 5 million doses from BNT in December when the deal stalled. At that time, we had already agreed on terms. Both sides have reviewed the contract. We had already exchanged draft press releases for the respective other side to look at. We had already gotten that far, and only the final step remained to be taken when things changed. Well, it was only revealed this year, several months after the stop of the signing of contract, that the deal was stopped due to China's last-minute intervention. So it became clear that Chinese, together with the Shanghai Fosun Pharmaceutical, it's a Shanghai-based company who is also the general agent for BNT's Greater China market. Well, they were playing a role in the intervention. So therefore, until 2 months ago, 2 tech companies and 1 religious charity group in Taiwan volunteered to purchase 15 million doses and worked with the government to negotiate with BNT and Shanghai Fosun. So it's a very complex negotiation, I may say. Despite signing the deal with Shanghai Fosun, an agreement has been made that the BNT, the German company, would be manufacturing and shipping the vaccines directly from Germany to Taiwan. So this tailor-made public-private partnership turned out to be working and to counter the Chinese blockade. However, politics does not stop here. On the first shipment of BNT vaccines to Taiwan last week, Shanghai Fosun managed to put its signs which says Shanghai Fosun on the containers of the vaccines before the plane took off in Europe. And what they were doing was clearly to take credit, as if it is under their mercy that we received the vaccines. So this act of Shanghai Fosun was heavily criticized by the public in Taiwan. And therefore, before the plane landed in Taiwan, the signs of their company's name were taken off. While there are quite a lot of dramas with our procurement of BNT. We at the same time feel, and this is where our topic of diplomacy, vaccine diplomacy comes in. We feel very grateful and warmed from the very general kind actions of several countries that donate vaccines to us. That include Japan, US, Lithuania, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Poland. So in late May and June, the United States and Japan sensed the political crisis in Taiwan resulting from the new wave of pandemic outbreak here, and they began to donate vaccines to us. The United States shipped 2.5 million doses of Moderna vaccines to Taiwan, and Japan donated a total of 3.4 million doses of AstraZeneca vaccines to Taiwan. So what's very interesting to some people is that Japan's first batch of vaccines arrived on June 4th, the hypersensitive anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre. And that's the United States senators who announced the U.S. decision to donate. They were flying in Taiwan on a military plane, which was the first time in the history. As a former U.S. official said, it was probably a logistical coincidence that this happened, but previous administrations in Tokyo and Washington might have ensured that this logical coincidence didn't happen. Therefore, many have said that these vaccines are not just the biological vaccines that fight the coronavirus. They are also political vaccines to stabilize a vibrant democracy from external and very hostile interference. And also they are economic vaccines to maintain a stable supply of semiconductor chips to the world. Well, to be honest, I'd like to believe the donations were either from the US or from Japan or from other countries were less about the China relationship than they were about helping Taiwan, helping a country that is in need and that's on the democratic front line with them. But of course, Beijing strongly objected. China's foreign ministry suggested Japan was exploiting the pandemic to put on political shows and accused the US of breaching the One China principle. Well, however, I still believe that I still would love to believe that you are not supporting Taiwan just to antagonize China. You are supporting Taiwan because Taiwans have supported many of these countries earlier last year in the pandemic. Well, as in the case of Lithuania, Slovakia, Czech Republic, and Poland, Taiwan sent medical masks and supplies to these countries as part of our mass diplomacy initiative last year. So, and we on the other front, we are also all together in the fight against authoritarianism and against oppression. So I would like to think that you are not supporting Taiwan just to show a political message to China, but you are supporting Taiwan because we are, or you are supporting any country that needs the vaccines because we need the vaccines, and that's a must in the fight against the coronavirus. And I think that this very basic and humanitarian front of the discussion got lost a lot in conversations. So overall, as I said in the very beginning, I'm not very sure because Taiwan is very unique in the whole geopolitics of vaccines. We don't get any donations from Russia or China, or but rather we work together and we get donations, and we are part of the global donation program by the US, by Japan, and by several European countries. And we are actually grateful for that. And of course, no strings attached in the donations. So I'm not sure how Taiwan's experiences can be generalized, but I still would like to offer the story and experiences we have for discussion. And that would be my presentation.
Thank you so much, Peifen. We will talk a bit more about your unique experience later. We're now opening the floor for questions. Can I read one from the chat box, and then if there's there are no other questions, we can discuss among ourselves. First question is for Kun Abhisit. It's in the chat box. Is vaccine self-sufficiency a goal for Thailand? And what is the role or the aim of Chulalongkorn University, which is supposed to be developing your own vaccine? So what's happening? Is there hope for a speedier progress on this vaccine?
Right. Can I answer that and also make a few more general points?
Yes, please.
Because
yes.
they'll be related. But well, first of all, I saw also in the chat box that Kun Sunny has commented. So I would just like to thank him for that. I think maybe I've chosen the wrong word to describe what I was trying to say. What I was trying to say was that the immunity given by the Sinovac vaccine deteriorated from its peak. I did not mean to full immunity in a sense of 100% efficacy, but it declined rather rapidly. So after about 3 months, you really need a booster shot. That is what the policy of the Thai government is today. Now, the issue of self-sufficiency and goals, well, this is very interesting because I was going to comment that while I said that COVAX was too little too late, I think my sentiment I share with Butch, that this, in an ideal world, this should be the model of how we deal with the pandemic. The problem is, even in democratic countries, maybe you can call it nationalism, but the sense that you still need to put your own population first is never going to go away. So that's why, despite what you say is a very worthwhile investment, you still see high-income countries not really willing to pool together the resources because they are still debating whether they need a third or fourth shot for their own population. And in the case of Thailand, for the AstraZeneca production, we are already under pressure from the electorate to restrict exports. I think that has already affected, this would certainly affect the Philippines, would affect Taiwan too, I believe. And again, it's hard to say that we want to uphold these democratic values, but we also need to overcome public sentiment that is still very much domestically focused. And that's an issue which is very hard to get around. Now, my own take is that Thailand would like to be able to be the hub of some of the healthcare products and services. And the ability to produce vaccines domestically is good. Although when the deal was struck between AstraZeneca and Thailand, it was clear that this was going to cater to the demands of the whole region, not just for Thailand. And now that we have places like Chulalongkorn developing its own mRNA and other vaccines, clearly, I mean, if we could be self-sufficient, that's well and good. But in fact, it would be better if we can create hubs around the regions, coordinate, and really supply the whole region in a way that we want to see at the global level as well. But let me just point this out, since we're talking about this and the issue of efficacy as well. I think the mRNA vaccines are also going to prove that their efficacy against Delta and the new variants are not as good as claimed. And I think the figures in Israel, in the US, in the UK are now suggesting that that is the case. So that then calls into question what used to be the conventional wisdom, that we could actually create herd immunity through vaccination. Now I think people are moving away from that because they are going to find it very difficult to achieve herd immunity. And then the question is, well, if herd immunity is elusive, we can't get it, how do we manage this? And it looks as though the way we're going is that the third shots, the fourth shots will go through the same problems that we've discussed about what's been happening over the last year and a half. And one possible game changer obviously would be if somebody discovered treatment or drugs, and then maybe the competition or the diplomacy or the war would move towards drugs and treatment supplies. I should also mention one other issue, that the one thing I do see about, the good thing I see about AstraZeneca is that it also comes with a new model of supply and cost to end users. Okay, I think it's the only vaccine where it recognizes that it has received funds from the public sector and therefore is supplying the vaccine at low cost, not at what market price would dictate. And I think it's a good model. It's a pity that it seems to be the only vaccine that is adopting this model, and it's only adopting this model only until the pandemic is declared over. And the issue I'm bringing up is that there is this issue of cost and pricing. And the other vaccine producers are going to be making, have already made, and will be making a lot of money. And that also makes it difficult to get schemes like COVAX and other multilateral schemes going if the model in terms of pricing is still very much up to market forces and the private sector. And I think you need to explore more about the AstraZeneca model. The final point I'd like to make, because I think Butch has also mentioned this, is another impact on liberal democracy is the fact that over the last year and a half, almost all governments have grown in size and have run up high level of public debt, have at their disposal far greater amount of funds and money that it can choose to distribute through various compensation schemes or whatever. And you can see how that can play into the hands of populists or authoritarians, which are problems that liberals and Democrats have faced even before the pandemic. I hope that sort of answers the question and also makes a more general point.
Yeah, I think we'll get back to you later, Kun Abhisit. There's a question for Butch and later for Peifen. Speaking of authoritarians, Butch, the question from the floor is, how does the Filipino public view the Duterte administration's management of the pandemic, especially the vaccine rollout? And would this affect Duterte's vice presidential bid in 2022? This questioner must be really following Philippine politics. Please unmute yourself, Butch.
Is it okay? Can you hear me? Yeah?
Yes, we can hear you now. Okay.
Okay. Well, it has been observed and it continues to be observed. The Philippines has had the longest lockdowns in the world. And it also has the most number of names for this various types of lockdowns that the government imposes on our people, which really is an indication of the failure of government, not just to contain the pandemic itself. Well, yesterday, we keep every day since the past 3 days, we keep hitting beyond the record number of new cases per day compared to the very start of the pandemic. We've been hitting more than 20,000 new cases a day. And in fact, yesterday, the rate of positivity almost hit 30%. Almost hit 30% of new cases. which is a clear indication that and many doctors observe that those figures may not even be the accurate figures. They are perhaps, they do not reflect the real figures, in the sense that we have not really been doing testing and contact tracing. We have neglected those most basic function, you know, in the containment of this problem. So, and even the Secretary of Health has admitted this, that the numbers of the Department of Health do not actually reflect the numbers on the ground. And if you ask him, so what are the numbers on the ground? And he cannot tell you any number, because the Department of Health is simply not knowledgeable about what is actually happening on the ground. Part of the problem of the Secretary of Health is that he is not actually on top of the situation, because the ones who are running the task force that is overseeing the government's efforts to contain the pandemic are really the generals, people in the military, you know, who have, they may be good soldiers, but I don't think that they're the good managers and scientists, you know, who can figure out the best way to approach to deal with the pandemic. So, and the problem here is because we have not been able to contain the pandemic, it has led to suffering, hunger among the very poor people. And while the government initially attempted to provide direct cash transfers, it has run out of money, and it's unable to do that right now. And because of that, you know, there are many people outside in the streets looking for food. And every time there is a community pantry that's set up, you know, people rush to it, and you know, they all congregate around it, asking for food. So it has not been able to address that problem, much less, you know, has it been able to, in fact, minimize the impact of this crisis on the economy. I think deficit has soared to about 9.5%. Debt to GDP the first 2 quarters has gone beyond 60%, which is the threshold, you know, when credit rating agencies determine whether, in fact, you can still manage your debt. So the situation is not only bad on the vaccine management side, but it's also bad in the sense of how the consequences of pandemic is mitigated insofar as the suffering of the people. And it's also bad because it's dragging the economy down. And I think the most basic problem is really there is no national leadership that is directing and providing guidance on what the country should be doing to deal with this problem and its consequences. And so, but the worst part, and which is now really the preoccupation of the Senate, is recently the Senate has discovered that the procurement of PPEs and other requirements of the pandemic has been attended by corruption. There's been corruption, and right now the Senate is preoccupied with making sure, you know, finding out who is behind, you know, the transfer of billions, almost $1 billion to a small agency for the procurement of PPE requirements. So ordinarily, especially in the past, this situation is enough to get people angry out and, you know, out there in the streets. Well, with reference to will he win as a vice president in 2022? Well, I'm not even sure if he's really going to run, you know. But if he decides to run, he cannot be as certain as he was before the country was hit by the pandemic, because clearly the mismanagement of the pandemic problem has brought hardships to the people and to the economy in general. And it won't be long when the stomach is painful and when people are hungry, they know who to point to as the person responsible for all of these things. Is that going to come by election time? I don't know, but things are developing, and more people are speaking out, which they have not done before, including people right within the coalition of the president, accusing the president of not being able to address the situation. So that's where we are right now, and we're still in lockdown, and and we don't know what's going to be the next variant of this lockdown. I think the lockdown has had more variant than the pandemic.
Virus. Anyway, thank you so much, Butch. There's a question for Peifen. Is there a difference between vaccine distribution in the different provinces in Taiwan between the DPP, your party, or the KMT, or other locally administered provinces? Or maybe the distinction is irrelevant. Can you please unmute yourself? Okay.
Yes. There's no major differences in provinces because it's usually it's the CDC's decision to administer like what age group, which priority group. But so in principle, there's no differences. But we do see a lot some violations in certain cities. We have cities and counties in Taiwan, not provinces. Cities and counties, they might use, some mayors use vaccines as a political tool for their support, for themselves to gain political support. For example, we have this priority group of people who can be administered first because they are the necessary officers for the fight against the coronavirus. So there are some officers officials in the central government that fall into this group, and there are also local officials who will fall into this group. But for local officials, it's the local government's responsibility to identify who are these officials, and some local governments may put people who are actually not in this category in this category. So there are cases of violations in executing the inoculation program. But I would say, but as a policy and as a principle, there are no differences between cities and counties.
Thank you, Peifen. There's a question for all the panelists. The metaphor of war against COVID-19 has been used by many governments and in our countries. So do you see a shift in the use of the war metaphor as the pandemic evolves into an endemic phase? So who would like to take that first? Kun Abhisit, what will be the metaphor as we assume that we're going to live now with the COVID-19, it becomes endemic?
Well, it's interesting. Well, the war, I think they had a special panel on this issue, right? In this conference about the use of the war metaphors. I'm just waiting to hear, because if, and it's still an if, as countries who might want to move from the so-called zero COVID strategy to living with COVID, how they will coin that in a language without conceding that they've been defeated in the war. So I think they would probably just sidestep this metaphor and try to portray the virus as something else. Otherwise, it's like admitting defeat, right?
Interesting. How about you, Butch? What will be our how would we call this, living with COVID-19?
Well, I still have not given up on the idea of fighting to end the pandemic. I agree that initially many countries paid more attention to their own needs. I mean, expectedly, vaccine nationalism could not be avoided. But we are seeing that if we don't pay attention to other communities, other countries, variants will continue to develop. And I think this experience with Delta is a good experience in the sense that if you don't pay attention to other countries, other communities, and let them suffer with serious infections all around them, eventually variants develop, which can go back and haunt those countries that for a while realized that they had actually reached herd immunity until this phenomenon of fully vaccinated people being infected nonetheless by the virus. So I don't know when that realization will come, but really, as you said earlier, Abhisit, one country cannot be satisfied with being able to deal with that problem within its own backyard, because if you don't solve the problem of the world, your problem may be solved temporarily, but it will come back. And like Israel, they started out initially leading the world in terms of and even UK, but now Delta is coming back to haunt them, and now they're faced with problems and they have to go into lockdowns, repeating the exercise itself. So unless people fully grasp that we have to fight this war as one big community and really look at what that proposal is, set an objective to end it, but putting out the money and working out the necessary assignments to be able to do that, then we might just have to be satisfied with living with the pandemic. But I think it's too early to give up the war itself, because I think the war has not really been waged yet. Maybe the battles have been fought, but the war has not been fought.
How about from your perspective, Peifen? Did you ever use war, the word war in Taiwan? You have been quite successful, like Thailand initially.
Yes, we did. I think from the very, very beginning, when we realized that there's this virus, there's this contagious disease in China, when the rest of the world probably hasn't really noticed. We use the word war, like we are fighting the pandemic, we are fighting the war, and we always use see the pandemic, feel the dance of war. So I guess we use it from the very beginning, and we are still using it, and probably the use of the word war won't end soon. So from the same logic, from this logic, we also try to develop our own domestic vaccines. So we have 2 companies that are currently working on this, and one has already received the EU, the product has already received the EUA from our government, and the other one, the EUA has been denied, but they are still working on it. So we see the vaccines as a strategic goods, like to be used in the wartime. So I guess I don't know how long we will fight this war, and I don't know if it will ever end or if we should continue to fight. But I guess the metaphor will continue to be used for some time.
Okay, thank you. We have another question for Kun Abhisit. There have been reports about Thailand reopening, I think October 1 onwards. So what is the public sentiment, and is this opening realistic given the current cases in Thailand?
I'm not really in a good position to answer this one. But what happened was the Prime Minister announced, I think back in June, that he would like the country reopened in October. I think he gave a deadline of 120 days. The problem is, since his announcement, the pandemic situation has actually deteriorated somewhat. Although the last couple of weeks have seen a slight improvement, it's still a far cry from the kind of environment and conditions where people can feel confident of opening up. At the same time, obviously, because the economic costs have been so high, there are those who argue that we should open up. I think the most sensible approach should have been to set, rather than set targets in terms of dates, the government should have set targets in terms of the rate of vaccination, the rate of infection, and really rally the public to achieve those targets in order to reopen. That would have made a lot more sense, but that's not the way it's been done. So it's going to be largely very much a political decision, where I think the public would be probably fairly evenly split between those who recognize that the conditions are not right for reopening and those who feel that the economic cost has been too high. But my point has always been that unless you get the situation under control, even if you open up, it doesn't mean people will come and visit. Doesn't mean people will engage with us more if they see the numbers as rather scary. So in either case, the priority must be to get things under control first.
Thank you, Kun Abhisit. There's a question for all of you. I think, can you please answer this briefly? Because I think our end is coming soon. Given the pandemic and its all-around political impact, what is its most significant impact, either negative or positive, on your respective political parties? Who would like to start first? Kun Abhisit, what is the impact on your
political party? I'm not an
party?
active member at the moment. I'm more concerned actually with the impact on society as a whole. We've paid a very high price in terms of lives, in terms of suffering that people have had, and we've paid a high price in economic terms. And I think that the biggest disappointment for me was, despite this kind of situation, the political parties have not been able to get together to show any kind of concerted effort that would restore the public's faith in the political system. And to me, that's the biggest disappointment. And if anything, because of the deteriorating situation as a whole, it's going to make that democratic renewal that we talk about a lot harder.
How about from your perspective, Butch, the impact on the Liberal Party?
Well, not just the Liberal Party, but I guess more on the party in power, because before this COVID, the expectation before was it would be very difficult to defeat the Dutertes come 2022. But the way we've seen how they mismanage the pandemic crisis and its attendant economic dislocation and other problems that it generated, people are starting to think very seriously whether, in fact, this administration deserves a continuing mandate. And I think that questioning is going to lead to more cracks within the administration coalition, which will then open up the possibility of the opposition doing well come 2022. We still have about 8 months. And right now, the situation, the crisis, as well as the issues of corruption attending the crisis and the mismanagement by the government of the crisis is being talked about everywhere. And I think that's not going to do the administration good. But the challenge is, can the opposition find a way, including those who have been disgruntled by the performance of the administration to come together in a broad coalition to make sure that the Marcoses and the Dutertes in 2022 do not return to power. And I think the situation now has been greatly helped by the issues attending the surrounding the crisis. And so in that sense, it has done the prospects of an opposition doing well in 2022 good, and perhaps even better as the months to come, the months will come, as we confront this problem, as it gets worse by the day.
Thank you, Butch. Peifen, how about the impact on the DPP?
Well, well, following the war metaphor we were just talking about, I guess we are still in the middle of the war, so it's hard to say the impact either on the DPP or on the society. But since the DPP is the ruling party of Taiwan, I guess I can probably share my observations on the impact on the society. It's a bit odd to say this, but I feel the pandemic experiences so far has somehow boosted our public's confidence in our country. This is probably weird to hear, or just in the context of global pandemic. But Taiwan had been, well, despite the recent spike in May and June, but we had been quite if I may to say, successful in containing the virus overall. So this somehow boosted our people's confidence a lot, because before we were a lot of times the followers on global issues and we learn from others. But this time with the coronavirus, I guess our rapid response has helped us a lot in containing the virus. So I guess it's still an ongoing process, but I would say so far, generally speaking, I guess the lasting impact is that, we can do this, and we can do it on our own, and we can even be someone other countries can learn from, and we can be proud of ourselves. I guess this is an impact among many others.
Yes, and I think there was a question. No, this is maybe from me. Is that Taiwan is developing its own vaccine, right? Medigen.
Yes.
Can you tell us about it? Because your president already was jabbed with it.
Yes.
Just briefly.
Yeah, sure. Both our president and our vice president have already injected the Medigen vaccine. So it's from last year, we have decided on this path that we have to develop our own vaccines, because this is gonna be something that's precious, that's valuable in the war against the pandemic. So currently we have two companies that are developing vaccines, and one is the Medigen, which has already received the EUA from the CDC, from our CDC, and the other one failed the EUA, but they are still working. So, and we have, I think, so far we have about 0.6 million Taiwanese people who have already chose to and be administered by the Medigen, the domestically developed vaccines. So this is our progress so far.
Thank you so much. And on that note, a counterweight to Chinese vaccine diplomacy, developing our own vaccines. Thank you so much, Abhisit, Butch, and Peifen. Very informative panel. And we'd like to thank you all and turn you over to the main room.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Marites and all the panelists. Let me start where I should have started, which is to tell you my name.
Robin, I'm sorry.
No. I'm Robin Ramcharan at Asia Center. I'm here with James Gomez and all my colleagues who contributed tremendously. We didn't have time. I wanted to ask Abhisit, but maybe this will be for next time. China says that we don't interfere, but suddenly we see a statement on their embassy website. Don't criticize Sinovac. So interesting. If you will allow me just 30 seconds to just note a few things that came up in your discussion regarding the geopolitics. One is the low, which was mentioned, the low or the failure of multilateralism, and the descent into vaccine nationalism and vaccine diplomacy for a variety of reasons. Some good, image building, some others not so good for blockading, and maybe for, in other ways for interfering. Secondly, it was noted that there is all of this is happening in the existing and continuing context of a global decline and regression in democracy. And I think that point is very important to note. And interestingly, what came up especially in your slides, Secretary Abad, which is that democracies, the high-income democracies must respond inclusively, for the soft power, if I may put it that way, of democracy. A couple more points. One is the interesting thought that there is a new mode of multilateralism, a new way, the COVAX scheme. And the COVAX scheme represents something rare in international politics, which is the application of the principle of equity in international affairs. And lastly, I think we have the issue of values. Abhisit, you mentioned that ASEAN needs a new or an enhanced common platform, values-based platform. And of course, that begs the question of whether the charter and the declaration and so on, which were crafted right here in Thailand. And finally, as I thank the panelists and called, I wanted to note Asia Center's shared values with you all and also with CALD. And we would like to just say that we look forward to further collaboration in this way.